Greetings and welcome to another episode of Master Phil in Your Corner. This is episode 117. We have a very special guest, another repeat offender, as we call them. This is Tom Husted, and we will be discussing the history of combat arts, starting with two of our favorite wrestling and grappling, wrestling and boxing, actually, right? And you know, Tom has been on before, but he's got quite an interesting history. Uh, he was the winning side of arguably the best high school wrestling match of all time between Tom Husted and Daryl Burley. What was that? The 77? That was a
Yeah,
70
1977 semifinals,
finals.
state championship. Yeah.
And then you guys actually wanted to be in teammates at Lehigh.
Right. We're at Lehigh together and won Eastern national titles together. And at the time when I wrestled Daryl, 1977, he was an unknown.
Yeah.
And I didn't know who he was. And I pretty much knew most of the wrestlers, the major wrestlers in New Jersey.
Yeah.
And suddenly I'm against this Daryl Burley I'd never seen before until weigh-ins. When I saw him in weigh-ins, he looked more like a basketball player than a wrestler. And I thought, this shouldn't be a hard match because I had won like 64 matches in a row. My closest match was by 8 points. And little did I know, it went into overtime and I won by 1 point. And then amazing thing about Daryl, he went from that, like hardly anybody knew him.
Yeah.
And 2 years later, he won the NCAA national championships as a freshman, beating the defending national champ in the final, who was a senior who hadn't lost a match in like 70 matches.
Wow.
So I don't think anybody quite skyrocketed up like Daryl did during that 2-year period. And then he went on to win 2 national titles at Lehigh, and he was twice runner-up, went to the finals 4 times. So, he was quite a amazing, gifted athlete and a really wonderful person, too. I got to know him as a friend.
You ever win the Hodge?
What's that?
The Hodge Trophy?
Did Daryl?
Yeah.
I don't even know if they had it back then. I think that may have came a little bit later. I think that came later, as I recall. Yeah.
Cool. Well, before we get into this, let's not forget to thank our sponsor, philross.com. Without this, none of the podcasts will be possible. And we have to check out my new program online. It's called The Secrets of Kettlebell Training. And with The Secrets of Kettlebell Training, you have over 100 exercises demonstrated in full detail, all available online. You can check out my body bell method. It's up there, and we'll be doing an email blast and a social media blast on this on probably Thursday or Friday, sending it out worldwide. We have all the major kettlebell exercises, the Super 7 plus 1 demonstrated and explained in detail. And then there's manuals included. The one I wrote for NASM, kettlebell work, that was about 44 pages. And then you have the kettlebell workout library, which is also included. So we're gonna have some great stuff. And then eventually in that funnel will be my next book coming out, which is Exercise Snacks, Fitness 5 Minutes at a Time. It's already in at the publisher in editing. And then we also have the Survival Strong, that's Survival Strong with philross.com. That video training is available online right now. That includes a manual, and we will have the new Survival Strong book, second edition, will be out as well within the next probably month or so. Okay, enough about the shameless plugs. Talk about combat and combat arts. We look back at the history, and we have to go back to the Greeks. And this is something that we've been actually talking about for a while. You sent this to me, and it's really funny, Tom, because you know what? You said you did this in college. you did all your research on this, on the combat arts? It's funny because I also simultaneously, well, actually, like, you got a couple years on me, but I did this in college during my freshman year. We were studying history, world history. I focused on the combat arts, found out a lot of cool stuff, and obviously this stuff parallels with what you did. Um, but we harken back to the first combat art, which is first known combat art, which is, go ahead.
Yeah, it's wrestling. Actually, the first two original Olympic sports
Mhm.
was running and wrestling.
Yep.
And then all the ancient cultures had some form of wrestling. The Egyptians, the Inca, of course, in Africa, the Native American Indians, they all had their different forms. Because if you think about it as a child, what are the first two quote unquote sports you do? You run, all children run, and they like to wrestle around. And you see that with animals too, right? They run and also like to wrestle around. So it's a very natural thing, of course.
Yeah.
And then it evolved over the years. And a lot of people don't realize up until about 100 years ago or so, the two biggest professional sports was boxing and wrestling.
Yes.
Now, of course, now it evolved the biggest of baseball, football, and basketball. But before that, it was wrestling and boxing. And one of the big reasons was they used to travel around the country almost like a circus show.
Perfect. Yeah.
They would do boxing and wrestling matches because you didn't have even radio to go far enough back or TV. So it had to be brought right to the local town or city. So they were the big professional sports.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. You look
Now,
back, you look back at the
was
history.
that
Yeah, you look back on the history in this country, like guys like Frank Gotch, and he was a famous catch wrestler. And
right?
my grandfather was a boxing trainer down in Patterson at the time, and he used to tell me about the shows at the Armory where they had the boxing and the wrestling. And the funny thing was that actually TV kind of killed catch wrestling
Right.
and elevated boxing, because when that
Right.
came out, people couldn't discern what was happening on the television with wrestling, but they could see it in boxing. It was very easy to see, and that's why
Right.
it came with that professional wrestling, which is that kind of high flying, acrobatic, staged wrestling. It's very difficult, but it is staged. But that's why catch wrestling kind of fell by the wayside, because people talk about Brazilian jiu-jitsu, but we had catch wrestling for years.
Right. And what happened was too, I don't know exactly when, I think it was the early 50s or so. Wrestling unfortunately started to get corrupted. The mafia or whatever got involved in it. They got involved with gambling. And so they were gambling on matches, and they started to fix the matches, who was going to win or lose. And it got very corrupted. And because of that, it then evolved into this kind of circus show, which wasn't real wrestling. But it had a lot to do with, mafia or whoever getting involved with the gambling and fixing the matches and all that. But up until around the 50s, it was legitimate professional wrestling. And if all that hadn't happened, you would still have legitimate professional wrestling, just like you do in legitimate boxing.
How legitimate is boxing in some degrees? I mean, you look at the
Yeah, well,
yeah. I mean, it's gotten better, but there's some really serious corruption going on in boxing. Actually, I actually just resigned from the USA Boxing. I sent my resignation because they decided to let transgenders fight. I know. I'm like, I have to make a stand. A whole bunch of us left. Yeah.
yeah, right.
Yeah. So we got to get pushback. I mean, and the thing is that they're also doing it after the age of 18.
Yeah, that's a whole nother reality that anyhow.
So that's a whole other thing. But now, according to the information that you've been able to provide, wrestling came around 3000 BC, and then boxing got introduced around 1500 BC. Were you able to find anything like why they started doing boxing? I know it kind of came out of pankration. and for those of you who don't know, pankration is the ancient mixed martial art.
Right. Yeah. I don't know, and you would probably know more about this. My understanding, generally speaking, with martial arts, originally it had to do. I think it originated China martial arts. Is that where
You,
the
you
roots
know,
are?
there's so many different stories of how it originated. Some say that Alexander the Great brought martial arts to the to the west, to the east on his travels, and then they copied his movements. And then some people said, well, it originated with the monks in China, and some people
Yes,
say,
that's the story I
yeah,
know.
yeah,
What I heard is it originated in China with the monks
yeah,
to defend the monasteries, because back then you could have bandits come along or whatever. And so they developed it that way. And because they were monks, they weren't just fighters, they really developed their chi through meditation and qigong or whatever.
yeah,
So they had a lot of power, internal power from developing the chi that then ended up becoming martial arts. And originally it was supposedly developed to defend the monasteries.
yes.
So there's kind of a very, you could say, spiritual side to martial arts.
Oh yeah, 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 absolutely. And the more you get into it, obviously, I've been into it for quite some time, and the internal strength that you get from it. But it's funny, even though I didn't have quite the wrestling career that you did, you had an incredible career. I still consider myself a wrestler, you know,
Yeah.
because that gave me my base. And it's funny because my personal base was I started in wrestling, and then had boxing for my grandfather. I didn't compete in boxing till after I was wrestling, but he trained me in boxing, and then went into the martial arts. It's kind of like the history of the world here with combat arts, and then you look at what goes next, and if you're going by the chronological order that you're able to research, you see that jujitsu um, was developed. And it's funny, a lot of people don't know this too, because when you hear Itsu and Udo, right? The Itsu is the warring aspect, like the Jujitsu, that's what they use for war, but Judo was the sport or practice.
Right.
Yeah, because look, if you do Jujitsu locks on someone, start breaking their arms and necks and fingers and wrists and so forth, you're going to have no training partners. So
Right.
they had to develop a sport aspect of the art in order to practice it without killing each other.
And then you have a keto, right? And that's really interesting. I've seen a video on the founder of Aikido, a Japanese man.
Yeah.
And I think this is for real. Some people could look at it and say, oh, this can't be for real. He's kind of an old guy, and he has these big, young, strong guys try to attack him.
Yeah.
And he basically just moves his hand and touches them, and they go flying.
Yeah.
Now, it looks fake, but supposedly he had developed his chi so powerfully, his internal energy had so much power, he could just touch people and they go flying.
I'll tell you that I'm going to go by personal experience and having bounced and worked with some Aikido masters and been on a mat with them. Uh, I don't buy it.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm just going by, because I worked with a couple of these guys and I trained with this, master so and so, and yeah, you put any D1 wrestler on a mat with them, they're done. Yeah, it's
Well, it's interesting now, of course, some of the best mixed martial artists are wrestlers.
100%. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now at least the wrestlers have an avenue to go into if they want to become a professional athlete, because you can't do that with wrestling.
No,
So
no. I mean,
real
They tried that years ago. They tried that real wrestling league and stuff, and I thought it was a great concept. But then again, I just don't think they had the backing on it, and the financial backing. But
also the other aspect, not only did the professional wrestling in the US got corrupted by the 50s or so,
yeah,
but you had this long period, the best wrestlers in the world for a while were mainly in communist countries, especially the USSR.
yep.
So for a long period, they were dominating,
Mhm.
and they did not have,
There's a lot of reasons for that too. I mean,
and then yeah, well, basically they didn't want to have professional wrestling because they were already professional. The government was totally supporting them. and they were
Yes.
considered amateurs.
Yeah.
So they weren't interested in having professional wrestling because they were already professional,
Right.
and
Right.
they didn't. So I think if, let's say, the USSR during that period actually had been a capitalist country, they would have promoted professional wrestling. So that was another thing that prevented it
Yeah.
from becoming professional.
Because even you look at the boxing, like Cuba, like Taylor Stevenson, you know,
Yeah,
he
right.
was a dominant, amateur boxer for I don't even know how many years, but what, 15, 20 years, and
Right.
he was completely taken care of by Cuba. So, the communist countries definitely had an advantage until we were able to, actually have our professional athletes enter into these contests. They
Right.
definitely had a leg up on us. Then you go into you talk about Chiao, okay, in China. It was a throwing art, okay. Yeah, that's what I'd say, like, is the base as it kind of like almost like a judo, or because I'm not super familiar with that one. It came after jujitsu. I would think it would come from jujitsu, but
Yeah, I don't know that too much about that one.
well,
Yeah, it's kind of unusual.
yeah, well, because there's the Chinese have an art that includes kickboxing and throws.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's a fun. That's where Kung Lee came from. You remember Kung Lee? He was in the UFC and Strike Force champion and so forth. Yeah, that was his art. He actually he was a wrestler. I think let's see, San Jose, or I know he wrestled JUCO at least 2 years and did pretty well. And then and of course his kicking was off the charts.
You know what just came to my mind? During like the 60s and the 70s, the lightweight Japanese wrestlers were
Mhm.
untouchable. They had these guys that were so amazing. And some of them, there was a couple of them, they never lost. One guy, Utaki, he
Yeah,
never lost an international match. And Watanabe, I think he was like 125 and 0 or whatever.
yeah,
During that period, they were untouchable. And I ended up finding out one of the factors why. And I actually saw in an old film one of the coaches. I noticed they showed one of the coaches involved with the Olympic team. And this guy did not look like a wrestling coach.
yeah,
He had long white beard. He looked like a Zen master or something, very different than your typical wrestling coach.
yeah.
And what they were doing basically, they were somehow bringing together wrestling and martial arts and using the chi and judo and all that, and they were mastering that. And they were out there, and they just like nobody could come close to them. And they were doing stuff that was just never done before. And I remember one time years ago, um, I was able to work out a little bit with one of these Japanese lightweight Olympic champions, and you couldn't lift him up. He was around the same weight as I could not lift him up. He could focus his center of gravity and his core into the ground so much it was impossible to lift him up. He said to me, "Try to lift me off the ground."
Yeah.
I couldn't. It's impossible. I was like, "Oh my god!"
It's funny. I got to work with some guys from this, and one of the things I learned that technique. Also learned this one. When you're on top of somebody, okay, and like when I'm a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu too, and some people say, "God, you feel like you're 300 pounds on me," because what you do is when they breathe, you drop a little bit. Every time they exhale, you drop a little bit, and you can basically suffocate them. It's
Okay,
pretty cool. It's pretty cool when you get this down. When you're on top of someone, you're in a kesikatami, or have some type of other hold on them, and you're chest to chest. Every time they exhale, you drop.
interesting.
Yeah, it's really cool, and it's like a boa constrictor, or like a python. You're
Okay.
just because that's they don't squeeze like people think when they kill their prey. What they do is they wait for the prey to exhale, then they tighten up, and then the prey exhales and they tighten up again. And this is the same philosophy.
I think what's great about these type of sports is you're really working with body, and of course any sport, not just these, but especially when it comes to martial arts and wrestling, you're dealing with the body, of course, the mind, and then the other thing I'd have to say, you'd have to call it the energy,
Yes.
the energetic part. And you have to coordinate with all three. And now the whole concept of being in the zone is well known, big. They even have sports psychologists who specialize in that. But back in when I was wrestling in the 70s.
I do that now too, right? I do
right?
that. I'm a mindset coach now too. I don't know if you know that.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. I got hired by the Winning Mindset a couple of years ago, and I have like clients all over the world now.
Oh, great. Wow. Yeah.
Cool.
I mean, so you know all about it, the zone. I mean, basically, if you come down to the real basics of the zone is totally being in the present moment.
Yes. Yep.
That's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a few experiences when I wrestled.
Mm-hmm.
I got into the zone, but I didn't know what it was, and I didn't know how. I mean, if I knew what I knew now, I could have.
Oh God.
Zone all the time.
Yes. Yep.
But when I won the states my junior year in 1976, and I was in the zone that whole tournament. I ended up getting the MVP because of that too.
Yeah.
And it was amazing. It was just like being so focused, so there that nothing else existed. You weren't even really thinking that much about winning or losing.
No.
And I remember,
That's
in the what's that?
Yeah.
I remember.
I
remember I was in state finals. I knew I was winning, but I didn't know how much. I was totally in the zone. And then there was about 30 seconds left, and they even said it when there's a videotape of that match. The commentators, they say, "Oh, he's looking at the clock." I looked over at the clock, and then I was shocked. I was like, I was ahead by like 8 points.
Yeah.
And I was, oh my God, I didn't know it was that much, But I was just totally focused in the present moment. Even though there's thousands of people there, you totally tune out.
Yeah.
But even if you're not in a zone, I'm sure you have something similar happens when you compete.
Oh,
there could be a lot of people there, and before I wrestled, I would get nervous sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was out in the mat, I was so focused, the rest of that didn't exist, and I wasn't nervous anymore.
Well, there's a whole thing that goes with that. Like when you're being nervous, I mean, that's your sympathetic nervous system. That's how it's going to react. It's what you do.
Right.
Like, your body's getting ready for battle. The blood is going to the organs to protect. You get the butterflies, so forth. Your heightened awareness. And, it's, as Customato said, Mike Tyson's coach, listen, a coward and a hero feel the same things. It's how they react. Because a coward will run away from a fight and a hero will go toward danger, So, when you get in that zone, I mean, I remember actually the last time I competed was actually at like 48 years old, I won a Jujitsu tournament. And my last match, I was like, it was my 5th match of the day. And I was in the zone. Like, I didn't even know, like my corner's like, God, I submitted the guy in the finals, and I had no idea what the score was. I thought I was losing. I was up 9-0. I had no idea. I was just in that zone, and that's what I talk about with my my clients. I talk about just be in the zone, being present moment. Just exactly what you said. Be in that present moment, because when you do that, and here's something that's really funny. I know you're gonna love it. Isn't it fun when you're doing that?
Oh yeah.
It's
of course
fun, right? Because you just feel so free and just like you're just at it doing your thing, and nothing else matters. It's the most liberating feeling I've ever had, just being in that.
Right.
And I wasn't, able to do that until, when I was in my 20s. When I started, I went to Dr. Gilbert out of Montclair State, and he taught me this, and he was one of the first guys with the sports psychology. But it's pretty amazing.
Now, when people do like dangerous activities like rock climbing and things like that, they get into the zone, because if they're not in the present moment, they could fall off the cliff and kill themselves.
You're done.
So they get kind of addicted to that,
Yes.
Say adrenaline, whatever. But it's really because they're in the present moment. It feels so good.
Yeah.
Because they have the rest of their life, they may not be. I mean, let's give an example like these just beyond sports, like great performers, let's say like Michael Jackson, right?
Right.
Jackson, when he's performing, he was in the zone, he could dance, he could do all this. And a lot of people are like that.
Yeah.
But the problem is when they get off the stage in their everyday life, they don't maintain that.
Yeah.
They're not able, for whatever reason, to maintain being in the zone.
Yeah.
And they have all type of personal and personality problems. So the real mastery, of course, is how to bring that into your everyday life. It's one thing to do it when you're performing.
Right.
And there's a lot of performers who are able to get in the zone and they're amazing. And that's what people are really drawn to. But then in their personal life, when they're not performing, it can be a mess, you know, because they're not able to bring it into their everyday life. But, and you watch some of these athletes, you know, like the best in the world, let's say somebody like Messi, you know, the greatest maybe soccer player of all time. When you see him out in the field, he is in the zone. You know, that guy, he's doing like quantum soccer out there. He's like, how did he do that? But he's just so focused, so in the moment that he's just able to, and a lot of great athletes have been like that, you know. And when people see that, they're very drawn to that. They don't realize because it's like, wow, that person, and actors too, and actresses or whatever, musicians, you know, it's, but you can do it in your everyday life, washing dishes.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the thing. What you want to try to do is take that into your everyday life.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny. I just want, you know, there's one thing I saw in the, and I've been wanting to talk about it. You brought up Bondo in 1056 AD, the Burmese martial art of Bondo. I don't know if you know, that's I have my highest black belt in Bondo.
Oh, that's interesting. I never heard of it before until you mentioned it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Bondo to me, why I was drawn to it, you know, and I started doing Bondo in 1981, and I started doing Bondo because it was an all-encompassing martial art. It had the stand up, you know, you're like it's the left way, which is the nine striking points, you know, feet, knees, fists, and elbows and head. And then it had the grappling, which is the Naban. It had the Banshee, which was the weapons, you know, and the Kukri, which is the short sword, which is the one I competed with on the Knife or Death series. And, you know, it's got a bow staff, it's got a short stick, it's got a cane, it's got all these different types of forms. Actually, I still do the forms. It's got like, animal forms. Like I was more I've worked on the boar and the python were my two favorite. Boar was like the elbows and knees, and the python is obviously the grappling. So it was kind of interesting. And it's funny that it made your list here, which I'm going to put the list in the description of the podcast when I post it up. But
the other interesting thing too, when we're talking about the zone, they can measure brain waves, different theta, alpha. And so when you're in the zone, you're getting into somewhat of a meditative state.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
And I believe one of the major benefits and purposes of meditation is you're kind of training your brain to get into certain, not only state of consciousness, but brainwave. It's almost like an altered state of consciousness, you could say. And then you're training you so you can do that in your everyday life. Like, I drive a motorbike in Thailand. It can be kind of dangerous, but to me, it's moving meditation. I'm very focused, very aware. It's almost like I'm meditating, but very consciously awake and aware when I'm driving, whether it's a motorbike or a car. So it's so many aspects of life that you can bring that into.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Way beyond just sports. And nowadays, of course, we're more aware of doing that. In the past, like I said, in the 70s, it just happened. I didn't know why or what it was about.
Yeah.
But and then there's a whole thing. I remember in the 70s, I used to run almost every night for about, 20, 30 minutes.
That's another time it happens.
Right? What's that?
It's another time it happens. You get into that zone running.
Right. And I used to get into that. And I used to visualize. This was before they talked about this stuff.
Mhm.
I used to visualize and really see myself winning my matches, you know.
Yep.
And that was way before they started working with people to do that, you know, visualization and
Mhm.
feeling as if it's already happened.
Yes.
And that whole thing. And the whole thing about, you know, how we create our reality and also based on our perceptions or whatever. So yeah, it's very yeah, I mean, I wish I knew what I knew back then, but
I
at
know,
least I
I
know.
know. It's funny. I tell this to my guys I work with because I have, I got some young guys, and actually I have some older people too. I have some, we do corporate as well, but mostly I have athletes. And I tell these guys, I go, listen, I go, the stuff you have right at your disposal right now is just incredible. Take advantage of it. Take advantage of it because we didn't know any of this stuff. In the
Right.
70s, we didn't know any of this stuff. We just kind of came across it. I mean,
Right.
you know, and you just came into that on your own just by like naturally occurring. It happened organically. Whereas these guys are getting taught it, and I mean, you look at the wrestling. I don't know, do you watch much wrestling anymore? Or?
No, 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 no. I mean, once in a while, you know, the NCAA's or something.
I watch all the time. It's my favorite thing to watch. I love watching wrestling and then MMA and then boxing. The other sports I'm not so much into anymore, but I love watching. I watch Big Ten all the time, and I see what these guys can do, and it's just like light years ahead of the stuff that anybody, even the best of the best, were doing back in the day. The
Oh yeah,
the body
yeah. The
position.
training, all the methods are better.
They can all do gymnastics.
Yeah.
Oh, and I train my guys like that too. But part of our warm up, we're doing cartwheels and handsprings and backflips as part of our training, regular training. And we didn't have that back then. Nobody did any of that stuff. But the way they're training and the way these guys can move right now is just like incredible.
You know, it's interesting with wrestling. I mean, for me personally, I was going in a pretty bad direction when I was a young kid, and it
Yeah,
really, people say, how did wrestling change your life? I said, well, how did wrestling save my life?
saved my
It's
life.
not
Same thing with me. So
very common, I think, for a lot of athletes too. They find that direction to put that energy in a constructive way instead of a
right,
destructive.
right.
And especially for young boys. And so for me, I probably saved my life. But it also eventually led to a lot of other openings in my life, such as health and nutrition.
Right.
Because I remember in high school, I started to get into nutrition because I wanted to improve my performance. And I knew what you put into your body is going to make a difference.
100%.
And also, you had to be aware if you were cutting weight or dieting or whatever. So that's when I first kind of started to become aware about healthy eating and things like that. And then eventually, I think it was my junior year at Lehigh. I wasn't cutting that much weight, maybe 10 pounds. My off-season weight was 136, and I wasn't fat at 136. Then I would cut down to 126, 10 pounds wasn't much. But when I looked at my diet, I knew I needed to reduce my calories.
Yeah.
I looked at my diet and said, whoa, I didn't realize how many calories steaks have. Steak, a lot of calories. So I thought, okay, I'll cut out meat and chicken and eat mainly fish. So I did that, and I just naturally lost the weight from just doing that alone.
Yeah.
And then I noticed my endurance was better. I felt better. And so I never went back to eating chicken and steak again. And that was like 40 years ago. So originally I did it because of wrestling. And obviously people nowadays do it for all different reasons, whether
Right.
Don't want to kill animals or it's not good for the environment or whatever. But, basically, people eat meat or don't eat meat, that's up to them. My wife eats meat, that's up to her. I'm not like fanatical about it. But we are not meat-eating mammals. We don't have the teeth or the digestive. So we're not originally human beings. Eating meat is not natural human beings. But anyhow, so that got me into that. And then also, I think because, you get into the zone and everything, it eventually got me interested in meditation and even yoga.
Mm-hmm.
And then my senior year at Lehigh, the last book I had to read for a philosophy class I was taking was this book called The Tao of Physics by this very well-known and popular physicist called Frida Capra. This is back in the early 80s. And I read this book and it really opened me up a lot. I was never a religious person. If you had asked me about any of these things, I would say maybe it's true, maybe it's not. I don't know. I was agnostic, not knowing. I didn't consider myself an atheist, but I didn't consider myself religious. But when I read this book and it went into the recent discoveries in physics of quantum physics, and then bringing that together with some of the ancient Eastern spiritual teachings of cause and effect and different things, I was like, whoa, for every action, there's equal opposite reaction. That's the law of physics. It's connected with karma too. So I read this book and it opened up another world for me. And then after I graduated, for a while, I was involved with Herbalife, the company Herbalife.
I remember that. You had on the back of your vet.
Yeah, right, yeah. And it was in the early days. They had been in business for a few years, and we were doing quite well back then. But anyhow, so that got me interested in herbs and Chinese medicine and all that. And then from there, I got involved in a lot of different alternative and holistic healing and treatments. But I think the root of that was originally through wrestling, through taking care of the body, nutrition and diet and all those things, which continues, myself to this day. So it's interesting how sports can really open oneself up to something way beyond just sports.
Oh yeah, because it's not just the physical; it's a mental aspect, it's the health aspect, and that's one thing that I think we're truly missing in this country, and part of my quest here, to help people become healthier, eat healthier, exercise regularly. We're gonna have to come on next time and do something on what to eat and so forth, because we have to. Do you have any parting words for the audience?
Well, concerning health and nutrition, I just want to say one last thing. A lot of people have problems losing weight. Losing weight because of toxins. What happens with the body is, unfortunately, our air and water and soil is polluted, right? Nobody can avoid toxins in this day and age, whether it's heavy metals or pollution or whatever. It's gonna come into your body, and quite often the way the body protects itself is the toxins or whatever it is will lodge in the fat cells to protect the vital organs. So it does that because if you start getting that into the